Thanks for coming. I'm Jess Frost. I run the Art Center at Duck Creek. And this is Don Christensen, I was about to say the wrong name, who has brought us this beautiful exhibition. Basically, it's 3 different bodies of work: the wood compositions, the stool paintings, and the works outside. The wood compositions date back as far as 2000, over 20 years. The stools began in around 2012, and the signs are new. I want to say what a pleasure it has been to work with Don on this show. He actually sent a proposal to us 2 years ago that I never received because we were using the wrong email address. So after some conversation about that mishap, decided to put this show together, and it's evolved over time since the proposal came in. And I'm just going to let Don go ahead and talk to you, but please feel free to ask questions, and I think it's totally fair to raise your hand and participate in the conversation. We're informal and welcoming. Don?
Thank you, Jess.
Sure.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. Thank you, Jess, for the whole thing. I mean, and thanks to the Art Center at Ducks Creek for this opportunity. And yeah, it's been great. It's been a fabulous thing. I love. I know I'm going to sound immodest while I do this talk, but bear with it. I love the way it is here. You know, I love the way the work looks in this barn. I love this barn, and that's really how it got started. A few years. I came here. I don't know what the year was, but it was a nighttime exhibition of work by Christine Schuley, and it was before the barn was renovated, and it was really kind of like going to a rave or something in a warehouse because there were like nails coming through the walls. It was all ratty. And then it was a long while. A few years later, I come and the barn is renovated. I'm like, wow, what a beautiful space, right? And almost immediately, I knew that this work would look great in this room. I mean, it was really, the barn was the inspiration to do the exhibition. So, a few years go by, yes, I sent things to the wrong email address. I mean, sort of typical snafus for me anyway. Then, anyway, we finally got to do it this year. And Jess was just, a fabulous help in putting this together, and a great curator in helping me pick the work and hang the work. And yeah, it was a really good experience of doing this, and still is. It still is a really good experience. So I'm going to try to anticipate a lot of your questions, but as Jess says, you feel free to ask questions. But I think I'll talk for a while and maybe have a Q&A after. Or if you really want to know something badly, go ahead, raise your hand, and I'll let you. So, and I have these notes here, which, okay, the process, right? People often ask, how did you do this? How do you get started doing stuff like this? Well, I collect things, and I used to collect things a lot without knowing why I was collecting them. And one of the things I was collecting were old pieces of wood, usually like this dimension, right? And they were cut-offs from construction sites, and also wood from demolitions of apartments and stuff like that. Actually started when I still lived in the city, and I was working on some of these crews and I'd bring these pieces of wood home. Why? I didn't know. I liked them, right? And that sort of continued. That process has continued, and to this day. But what it developed into, once I started, I didn't know what I was going to do with them, right? Once I started painting on these little pieces of wood, I realized that's what I was going to do with them, and it became exciting, and that the the found surfaces on them, some of them, like became very inspiring and helped me to make the paintings, right? As opposed to a white canvas, right? So I developed this thing of, if I saw a piece of wood, whether it was on the street or no matter where it was, I had to pick it up and take it home, because if I didn't, I was going to destroy my intuitive connection to the piece of wood and to the making of the artworks, right? And I've tried to maintain that. I can't say 100% successfully, but I've been pretty true to it, Evidence like this piece, which is maybe the last, or not only the last, the latest of all these wooden pieces. All those yellow pieces up there in the top, they were in Paris, on the street, and near a print shop where I was working and staying at the time. And I had to put them in my suitcase and bring them home. So anyway, that's important to me, is that I have, once I develop an idea or a vision or something, that I try to stay true to it, but I have to stay open, I have to stay as intuitive as I can. And so I made a lot of these little wooden paintings on the cutoffs and on the found panels. And I still have a lot of them, actually. I've made so many of them. And though I've sold and had to part, not had to part, but got to, part with a lot of them. But a lot of them also became parts of these pieces, right? So these pieces also are found wood for I'd say maybe now, for about half, less than half, right, of the wood. As you've probably noticed that they're all, these are really all different pieces of wood, right? And they're all different vintages, right? But some of them, like maybe this one, I can't remember all of them, but some of them, I actually bought the wood, a 1x3, a 1x4, 1x6, and ripped it up and brought it home and put it on the sawhorses and painted it, And I would use all kinds of paint, I had oil paints, I had acrylic paints, I had house paints. And I would paint them, and then I would put them through my saw. And my saw, I have this table saw. It's the second one I've had. This one I've had for like 15 years now, 15, 16. Anyway, it's a vital tool to me, I use it all the time, Not as much as I used to, but it was like these paintings were made on that table saw, which sounds kind of strange to make a painting on a table saw, but I really think of these things as paintings. Though the process, again, all right, so I have these blocks of wood. I've found them, I've made some, and I have big cardboard boxes like this, right? This high. And I would take the pieces of wood and throw them in a cardboard box. And depending on the color, and again, intuitively, what the vibe is, this one goes in that box, this one goes in that box. The box gets full, you dump them on the floor, right? And you start moving them around. And you start making these things, right? Which is, at first it's fun, but then after a while, crawling around on the floor on your hands and knees, moving things around gets to be a rather big pain, And then I get up on the ladder, right? And you look at them, you go like, okay, that piece needs to go over there, and this one over here, and you keep doing that up and down the ladder, down on the floor, moving around. And at some point, it got very frustrating because you'll have it together, right? But there's parts of it, this part's not happening. And so we'll move this over here. Then it became like the thumb puzzle, right? Where you're making the image where you're moving the little squares of plastic around inside the thing, and you get it almost there, but there's one that's not right. And you have to move that one to make that one right. And it was like that. And so I got this idea. I have my digital camera. I'd take a picture of it, right? I put it in my computer and started chopping it up and moving it around in the computer. And so that started, and this was quite a while ago. I was a pretty early adopter of Apple computers, and it started me learning Photoshop, and which, you know, I kind of fell in love with it. It was a really fascinating thing. And the ability to color and to make layers and do all these things that you could do. Like Mary and I used to talk. Mary's here. Where are you, Mary? Oh, there you are. We used to talk about this, like, dump the bucket, you know, because I don't know how many of you know Photoshop, but, you know, if you have a shape and you, like, take the little, what used to, they don't have that tool on there anymore, but the dump the bucket tool, and you put the dump the bucket on the shape, then the shape fills up with the color that you had picked to dump the bucket. Well, that stuff became really useful, you know, and very helpful, and to this day has continued. We'll get into that later when I talk about what else was going on. So that's, the process. Okay, so as I said, I collected, and we got through these things. So I moved out to Springs 12 years ago, and I was already making these things, but I continued to make them out here. But I had made a few of these small step stools and small table pieces, but they weren't quite like that. They were just, you know, just the stools themselves. And I discovered in the yard sales here, you could buy all this stuff, right? And when I'd always been a yard sale kind of head, you know, I'd come out to visit my sister-in-law and my brother out here, and we'd, you know, Saturday morning, first thing, who's the first at the yard sale kind of thing. And then Sarah and I started going to the North Fork, and we'd go to all these junk and antique stores. So I suddenly had, as I said, I'm a collector, I had a collection of little tables and stools and stuff, right, in my studio. So at this time, I knew that I was going to do something with them, right? Because, you know, it was like, well, why are you collecting? Well, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was collecting them, and I knew I was going to do something. So I started painting on them, and some of them have imagery, which at this point I'd already started drawing a lot. And it was one thing I missed about this process and about the earlier process of the color stripes on the small panels, is that the drawing, you know, there really wasn't much to the drawing, and I really like to draw. So I started drawing, and a lot of the imagery, if you call it imagery, the designs, whatever, that are on these tables were drawings that I made in my sketchbooks, which I, to this day, carry around, and I have many, many of these things. You know, I just make lots and lots of sketches, and some of them become paintings. And anyway, so the paintings that they become sometimes, like this is a really new one, is this, like, and this became those things you've seen outside on the yard. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself because there's some other stuff I wanted to tell you about. Okay. So I started, you know, painting images and stripes and colors, designs on these little tabletops, stools, and I'm looking at them and going like, you know, so what, right? I wasn't getting anything out of it, right? I can't say anything, but it wasn't like really, you know, giving me a buzz at all. So and again, I think it was intuition, or maybe it was like I was looking for a place to put it away. I picked up one of them, and I went like, stuck it against the wall. I'm looking and I go like, obvious. This is what we do. These are paintings. Just like these things down here, they're paintings, you know. And it, you know, became kind of a novel way to make paintings. Plus, it was a great way for me to get all these stools and tables that are all over the floor of my studio, up off the floor and onto the wall. So, and when I first started doing them, and like I said, I did a few of them in the cities, and they were more simple. I think maybe this pink one was one of them, maybe the first ones. And I had an exhibition in Brooklyn, and I can't remember whether I'd moved here or not. Maybe I think I'd already moved here, and they were big, for me, big canvases, bigger than these, but not huge. And I had a few of these small tables planted kind of like this above the paintings, the canvases. And one reviewer, Joan Waldemuth, a good and interesting painter herself, had written a review of it in hyperallergic. I can never say the word. And she had said that the little step stools above the paintings looked like thought bubbles that the paintings were having. And I went, that's exactly right. Or maybe the thought bubble is thinking about the painting, like it'd like to be a big painting, or anyway, there became a conversation between the two, which I knew. I mean, why I wouldn't have hung them up there if I didn't know that was going on, but I wasn't able to articulate what idea I had about making me do that. But again, I try to stay really intuitive, and that's when I work that way. I learn from the work what it is. I don't really think up the work and then make it. Though I am making drawings, and the drawings become paintings. But for instance, the early wood panel paintings that I made were like this, and again the pink one. They were crosses, right? And I made a lot of them, because I had a lot of these little pieces of wood. I made a whole bunch of them, and I'm looking at one day and go like, oh my God, I'm painting crosses, And I'm going like, whoa. And, I was brought up Christian. I mean, I went to Sunday school and church, you would think that it would have some kind of meaning for me, And it hadn't until that moment. I went like, oh my God, they're crosses. And I mean, not that they ever became religious, but at that time I had a good friend who had just become an ordained Episcopalian priest. And we had made plans like, we're going to, the church is going to get some of these paintings and he's going to ordain them and they can be in their church. Unfortunately, he passed before any of that could happen, but it was a good dream. So anyway, so that's it on this process, I think. All right, so I guess we talk about the influences, or how I came to be doing this. I started making artwork really late. I mean, to me, it was really late. I was 40 years old before I did any. I went to art school for a couple of years when I was a kid. One summer, after my second year of art school, the summer I came to New York, and I never went home, I just stayed in New York. New York was exciting. It was fun. I didn't see going home. I thought, well, let's stay here and have fun, And I never really started making art. I was probably too busy having fun. But anyway, so what was happening around that time in Lower Manhattan, where I was living, in this law scene, there was a whole music scene starting up. You've all probably heard of CBGBs and the music scene in Max's Kansas City and all that. And I got very involved and caught up in that because as a kid in high school and college, I played in rock and roll bands. In fact, I actually had made some money playing in rock and roll bands that, was like my summer job, and so I was drawn to making the music, and I, made friends. I'd hang out every night at these clubs where this was happening, and started meeting other musicians and making friends. So I started making music, and I joined some bands, and some of the bands got kind of notorious and infamous, and one thing after another. And so I spent like, I don't know, the next 15 years at least, maybe a little more, being a rock and roll guy, right? And I did a lot of touring and made some records, and it was all great. It was all really a lot of fun. It was very exciting. But as I'm like pushing hard on 40, right? And I'm riding around in a Econoline Ford van with 3 other guys. Everybody's smoking cigarettes and, drinking beer and carrying on. And, town after town, and usually there were clubs where probably the median age of the audience was like 20, and it was starting to get to me, And not that I didn't like the kids, not that I didn't like the music. In fact, I loved the music. I loved the band I was in, and the guys I was in the band with are, dear, dear friends of mine to this day. But I had to stop, and not physically. I was just a wreck, So anyway, so I stopped doing that, and like, well, what's next? Well, I've got these pieces of wood I'm collecting, right? and my brother used to live out here. He lived in Springs, and I would visit him and Elaine often. And so that summer, I guess it was it might have been 1990. I was out here, and I didn't know what to do. Oh, I know what I had this old car, an old Buick Century station wagon, that was. I was going to drive to Nebraska. I'm from Nebraska originally, right? I was going to drive it to Nebraska and visit my father, who I hadn't seen in a number of years. And so I took the car to a mechanic out here in Springs. I said, "Will this car make it to Nebraska, right?" The guy looks it over and says, "Sure." I gave him $80 or something, and he did this and he did that. I get in the car. I get across the Shinnecock Bridge. The car died, right? I mean, died. The engine blew, right? And so I'm back at Dan and Elaine's house. I'm going, well, what am I going to do? I mean, this was my summer, right? So, and I don't know if you know, you probably don't, most of you probably don't. My older brother, Dan, was a painter, very, very good artist, very, very good painter. And he had a big studio here in Springs. And, he'd done it for years and years. He had all the paint, all this stuff. And I decided, and he willingly said, come in, use my stuff. And so I started making, again, these small, I call them cross paintings. They're not all crosses. Some of them are other configurations, basically stripes on a found wood ground. Anyway, so where was I going with that story? Sorry.
Your trip to Nebraska, was that Emery?
Oh, well, that's a good reminder.
I went the wrong direction.
Yeah, all right. So the influences. Yeah, how I got started, 40 years old, music career, blah, blah, blah. So I came here, I started painting. Also, when I first came to New York, and or when I dropped out of art school to be in New York, my brother was having a successful career, and he was represented by some like major galleries in Manhattan, and he was friends with maybe the major guys at the time, these modernist color-filled painters. And I got a job and met a lot of these people through my brother. And one of them was Kenneth Noland, and I worked in Kenneth Noland's studio for quite a while. Then I went on to work in Jules Olitski's studio, and I became good friends with Larry Poons. So I knew these guys, even though I was the kid and they were the big guys. I knew them and was friends with them. But that was my education. Even though I dropped out of art school, I had this really almost indoctrination of formalist, modernist art, right? From like the heavyweights, right? But what that did, even though it gave me a great appreciation of color, and of that kind of art, it also kind of freaked me out that this scene was so dogmatic in a way to me. It was very, very rigid. So I was, like I said, at that time I was drawn to this music scene of CBGB's, which was like the total opposite, which was, it was just the opposite. It was really radical comparatively. And so, I didn't consciously say like, oh, no, I'm not going to be an artist because that's all formal and uptight. I'm going to be a musician and be wild and free. But that's kind of what happened. And so I go on, I do the music thing for a long time. Then I start doing the art, and I realize I actually have this. I learned this stuff. I learned about color. I know about materials. I worked in like studios of like major artists, and I worked with the materials. I had a lot of education, let's say, in this stuff, so I could use that, and then use this collector or this found stuff guy, me, and the two of them come together. Again, this was not premeditated, but it became clear after a while, like this was, for me, a beautiful marriage of, prosaic material and formalist artistic ideas. So, since then I've kind of run with that idea. Again, not to be rigid about it, but up until fairly recently, the last few years, I've been pretty much an abstract artist. When people used to ask me, what kind of art do you make? I said, well, I make geometric abstractions, which is still pretty much true, though I find myself, the last couple of years, I'm making drawings of stuff, and I've made a lot of drawings of signs, and I've made 6 or 7 paintings from those drawings of the signs, and the signs are basically, as you see, they're color, they're stripe paintings, right? But they are illustrations or representations of something in an imaginary space, which is totally different from this in some ways. On the other hand, like you go out there, you see that sign, that is the same as that, as far as I'm concerned. They all go together. It's like, okay, how can I present color and the relationships of colors to colors, and it's not so much how can I present it, because that means I'm like being conscious of you guys. How can I present this to you? It's like, how can I put these things together in a way is satisfying, and probably satisfying to me, but just, stepping back and looking at something like, wow, I like that, kind of like making something that you like. And I guess that's kind of like the creative impulse for anybody, it's like, yes, you make things to varying degrees. People do things to please their audience, but so some people just do stuff to please themselves, which brings me to another influence, which was pretty major. In '86, I went to Nebraska. This is before I started painting. And was going to a high school reunion. And my buddy, a guy that I went to school with from grade school all the way through high school, and I went together because he lived in New York too. And so we went there, and we went to go see this outsider artist. He wasn't known as an outsider artist. He was known as a farmer who made things. He called himself an inventor, and he called his works healing machines, right? But, essentially, you would say he's self-taught or outsider artist or something. So we went to go see him up in the Sandhills, which is this area in western Nebraska, near where I grew up. And we get there, and the house is empty, the barn's all locked up, and nobody there. So the neighbor, the next door neighbor, or down the road a little bit, was Emery Blagdon's, this farmer's name was Emery Blagdon, was his nephew. And he saw us pulled up and stuff. So he comes over and we say, well, we came to see Emery. He said, well, Emery's passed, right? He passed not that long before, a couple of weeks before we got there. And so, so I said, but hey, you want to see his stuff? I can let you in, right? So he goes and gets a key, opens the padlock, opens this barn, and there's a structure smaller than this, I'll say maybe 2/3 the size of this, and didn't have this, glorious woodwork in it. It was much, much lower. But it was a raw barn, and inside of it was full of these hanging wire sculptures. And underneath the sculptures and planted among them were like little pieces of wood with paint on them, right? And on the floor were 2x12 planks that had paintings on the ground side of the planks facing down, which of course we didn't see first time going in there. And we're going like, oh my God, what is this? It was like mind blowing. I'm not exaggerating. It was like, holy shit, what is this? So of course we decided we had to save the work or buy it all, which we did. And that's a whole other story. I don't want to go through all that stuff. But anyway, my association with that work and realizing that this guy, who was basically considered a kind of weirdo hermit guy, right, was up here in the Sandhills making this stuff. And he was making them because they were healing machines. He thought that the wire sculptures that he was making, they had them hanging on the wall, it'd be like this thick. It'll be like 6 or 7 of them hanging on one big spike. He thought they had energy forces around them, right? He'd go like, because my partner, the guy that I went there with, had actually met him when he was living. He said that Emery would take him and says, can you feel this? Can you feel this, right? So anyway, so we get the healing machines, and just from taking them out of the shed and archiving it and keeping track of it, a lot of discoveries. I made a lot of discoveries. And a big one was there were a lot of paintings that he made. And there were small diagrammic paintings on pieces of wood that were stacked 4 or 5 high on the floor beneath these hanging wire sculptures, right? And they were exquisite. And my brother helped retrieve a bunch of them with me, and he helped clean them. And I mean, all my artist friends, that saw them, Al Taylor, Bryce Martin saw them. I mean, the people that saw them, everyone's like, holy crap, these are incredible, So that was a big influence, right? I can't say, maybe visually I painted on wood, and started off with small ones, but really the idea that this guy could do this and wanted to do this and was driven, or just, that it didn't matter to him it didn't even matter to him if he was an artist. He thought he was an inventor. And maybe he was, it's all, I like this word that we've been using for a while, the creatives, right? We're all creatives, right? So anyway, he was a big influence. Now, right then, like I say, a couple years later, I'm going all right, I'm sitting on the picnic table behind my brother's house going well, I'm not going to Nebraska. I don't know what I'm doing. What am I going to do? I'm not in the rock and roll band anymore. I don't want to be in the rock and roll band anymore. So anyway, that's how I got started doing this. And those are influences, the pretty wide and varied, from outsider art to formalist painters to what else? Music. Right. All right. So, questions? Yes?
Have you always stayed within the lines?
I'm sorry?
Have you always stayed within the lines?
Oh, with these?
Yeah, you ever
Well, these are,
propose or
well,
or have them go off the edge or layer? Are they always flat and always?
no, they're not always that way, but these are these are all separate pieces, right? So, yeah, they always stay. I looked at each piece as this is a piece of color, That's what it is, And the thing that I always say, like color doesn't really exist on its own, You don't, like people say, what's your favorite color? You go like, well, this is a red, right? Well, what kind of red is that, right? Well, this red is really being defined by the blue that it's set against, right? Because if you take that, change that to any other color, even slightly change the blue, this color changes too. So color only exists in relationship to other colors, and that is, like I say, I'd be up on the ladder looking down, and I'm going like, and well, that piece, that color is not working over here. That's got to go, right? And to the degree that there would be, the frustration would become so great, I don't know if I can see one where it's like, okay, I gotta paint over this color. So then I'd go back and, once it is assembled, paint on it, so. Yes?
So there's probably a backing on each of these wall pieces here.
Right.
Back.
So most of them have
So
them.
then is it glued or?
No, they're they're biscuit jointed, right? And I don't know, for the users who don't know, there's a tool that cuts a groove into the side of wood, right? You cut a groove here, and you cut a groove there, and then there's a little lozenge of wood, right, that you stick in that hole, and you glue the pieces together, then you clamp them up, right? So, as you can imagine, these are quite labor intensive, right? And what happens is that once the design is finished, or once the picture is like, okay, it's finished, then I have to flip it over, right? But it's all in pieces, right? So you flip this one, and then one next to this one. You flip them all over, and then once they're all flipped over, then you number them all, so you know which ones go where. And then I draw the lines of where the biscuit joints go, right? Because if you put them face up, then turn them face up to put the biscuit joiner into the side. So, it's just the actual physical process of making them was huge. And I left them that way for a long time, and I liked them like that because I think this is the only one. This one, see, doesn't have any backing on it, right? And I liked them without that, though they became problematic moving around because they would start falling apart. But they, in a way, they're like quilts. I think of them as like quilts of like, but that what's the word? The physicality of a quilt work, or the vibe you get from seeing things patched together, that's kind of what I like that, and I like that in these works. So I was thinking of kind of like wooden quilts. So it's better if they're just fastened together on the edges, but they can't really exist that way. They keep falling apart. So, hey.
Do you glue the assembled pieces onto the backing with glue? What do you use?
On the backing,
Yeah.
what did I use?
Yeah.
It's usually strips of poplar about 2 inches wide.
No, but I mean, do you use like a wood glue?
Oh yeah, wood glue.
And you clamp everything?
Yeah, it's
They look so precise and well constructed.
well, they're pretty precisely constructed. I mean, every piece has like been shaped on a table saw to fit into the pieces next to it, which is, anyway, it's nuts. I don't know. If I would never have, if I would have thought about making work that way, I would have never made it, you know what I'm saying? So. Hi.
Did you feel the vibe change when you went from the ladder to the Photoshop?
Not really.
You can't tell a difference. Is there a difference, do you think, in the outcome?
Well, it was just, the Photoshop was just a tool to get to the final. You know, the actual vibe, the actual piece or painting is not finished until I hang it on the wall and I look at it and it clicks, right? And often you hang it on the wall and it doesn't, which means more work, means. So, but what it did do is maybe the opposite of what you're expecting, is that Photoshop in the computer has really become integral to my process of art making. As I said, I make drawings. All these drawings, little drawings in the little sketchbooks, get scanned and then go to Photoshop, and then they'll either be modified, or one thing I like to do is take 2 or 3 drawings and sketch, stitch them together, or cut them up and stitch them together, and then I start coloring the shapes, dumping the bucket, as Mary says, and and then I have a printout, a simple inkjet printout. But that becomes the beginning, right? And it's not, yes, it helps me pick the colors, but the colors, there's no way you can match the colors. And so pretty much right away I stopped trying to do that, but it gave me a place to start. Okay, we'll start like, I know I want this to be red and this to be orange, and then all that. And that's the beauty and the joy of the physical part of painting, is like mixing the colors and putting them up there and looking at, like I say, the colors next to it and going, yes, no, yes, okay. And you do that. And that's really, really fun. That's really, a good part of painting, except for when it's not working out, right? Then it becomes like the real nightmare of painting, Hi.
You may have addressed this earlier because I came a little bit late to the talk, but when you started first painting the signs and making them, did any of that have to do with when you're driving through the Midwest? I see these sideboards.
The billboards. Yeah, the billboards. Good question. Those things definitely were influential. I would love to make some billboards. I would really love to make some billboards. In fact, yeah, right. The early on, I made. In fact, I did it for some grant proposals and shit a long time ago, early on in my career, whatever it is. I'd taken, in Chelsea, there's some signs over the street, right? There's that one that used to be, I don't think it's there anymore, where the 15th Street big market is, right? And there's a train, used to be a big billboard there, and there's another one, and I'd taken pictures of that and photoshopped pictures of my small cross paintings into them, thinking I was going to, influence somebody into, funding me or, providing me a grant so I could do that, but nobody ever did, so maybe someday, who knows. Hi.
What instrument did you play in your rock?
Oh, good question. Good question. I'm a drummer. Yeah, I'm a drummer. And that, yeah, the rhythm thing is, these paintings to me are really kind of obviously rhythmical, but I think all visual art has rhythm in it, the way your eye moves through the images or the image. But the influence of rhythm, a lot of it comes from textiles, and it helped me make some of these things. I saw a show a long time ago at the Newark Museum called The Narrow Loom Weaving of Africa. And there were all these, basically there were big kente cloth type things, right? But they had this film of the weavers, and a narrow loom is like, you know, at the most that can be like this, right? And they make these, they weave these narrow stripes, long, right? And they have different colors and different patterns, right? Then they take the stripes, or the strips, I guess is the word, and sew them together, you know, side by side, right? So then that becomes your kente cloth. Well, when I saw that, I realized I could do that. I didn't have to like make this whole thing. I could make this stripe. I could make them as stripes, right? And then take the stripes and fasten them together. But the other aspect of that, which was really maybe even more interesting, was the fact that while they were doing this, these women were singing and tapping their feet, you know, doing this. So there became this rhythm, right? So the patterns that they were weaving were most definitely involved with the songs and the rhythms that they were weaving to, you know. And that really appealed to me, you know, like this in some sort of conceptual way, you know, like the idea of you know, it sounds like that's technology in a way, you know. It's like the software that is running the pattern of the weaving machine, you know. And so, yeah, that was an influence. And then that reminded me of that years before, not a lot of years before, I'd been to New Mexico on a trip, and I saw Navajo weavers doing something very similar, you know, that the weavers were weaving together and they were singing together as they were weaving. So clearly rhythm was, you know, essential, whether it was essential to the design, I sometimes think it really was, or just essential to this, you know, developing a rhythm to working, you know. So yeah, very, very, very influential, as I'm very, I like to think I'm very rhythm aware because I'm a drummer and have been for most of my life. So, but good question.
Yo.
Oh yeah, hi, Mary.
I just want to mention, you can tell you're a drummer.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, you got it going on here, man.
ask Sarah. She'll I don't know
Yeah,
if she's still here. Hi.
It's been interesting. No, I just wanted to say that a lot of the people that come to the show, when they find out that Don is a drummer, all say, well, it's so obvious, but in the conversations that I've had with him, not that you're in denial of it, but it's not something that you were thinking about when you were making these things. It's just some inherent output. But it's not a self-conscious, you're not trying to create any sort of specific.
Well,
Rhythmic.
yeah, I mean, not premeditated, but once it starts happening, I mean, how you know, you have 3 of these, right? You got 2 of these, right? So you got 3 against 2 in the same amount of time span. If you're reading left to right or right to left, you know, it's like, you know, it's almost like notation of
Yeah.
rhythms, you know. So. Elaine.
I thought you might mention that you also have painted drum sets as well.
The painting, the what?
The drum sets that you have.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yes. In fact, I didn't even tell Jess about this because we were talking about this the other day. Like, well, does the painting influence the music? You know, because clearly, like, music has influenced the painting. Is I've painted a lot of drum sets. I've actually made drum sets and made paintings on them, and yeah, I mean, in that way, definitely. But which was when Jess had asked that question, I guess yesterday. It's a really good question because clearly the music can influence the paintings, but how would the art influence the music? You know, and I had a good answer today that I thought of, and it was, I mean, it came to me not so much even as an answer, but when we were putting this show together, originally, my concept of this was even more stuff, right? Because I actually have it. I have a lot of stuff. And I was thinking of hanging stuff, hanging wooden pieces, tables that had little pedestals, piles of colored wooden blocks on top of each other. And, that you really had this immersive experience in here. And that was from, or maybe influenced by the fact that my experience of going into Emery Blagdon's barn and having my mind blown by it. But as we got into this thing, and I guess Jess was kind of directing me or convincing me, and I'm happy she did. Maybe she'll not see it this way, but saying like, let's look at these things. You're not going to be able to see them, with all this going on, right? Well, my intention has always been whenever I had a show or an exhibition, is I want you to walk in this gallery, in this room, right? And to get the vibe. You don't have to look at the painting. You get the vibe, right? And that happens here. I think it happens here. Why does it happen? Because of color, mostly. It's like the mood gets, this color, I think, brings the mood up. And so, in that sense, it's very much like music. Because, I think music is, I don't know how to say this. Like people would ask me, and I agonized over this when I was younger. As I told you, I came to New York to be a painter, and I ended up being a drummer, right? Is that, am I an artist or am I a musician? You got to be one or the other, right? If you're going to be any good, you got to be one or the other. So I agonized over that a lot, and then I didn't. After I started being an artist, but my answer is when people would ask me about this, I would say like, well, musicians are artists, and so in that sense, I'm an artist. Even if I don't make paintings, I'm an artist. Musicians are artists. And that probably the main difference, if there is a difference, between making these things or playing drums in a band with Jake here is that, one, I'm doing this pretty much by myself, and two is like when I'm in the band, I'm collaborating with other players, right? So there's a big difference. But in actuality, we're both things, we're trying to create a vibe, we're trying to create an atmosphere. And music has something that I call as magic that is harder to define in painting and art, is that music is basically invisible, It comes out of the speakers. You don't see it, You can't touch it, right? But it's there, and it completely, it affects you, right? It totally affects you, and I hope to have that effect with my paintings, but also with my music. So, anyway, sorry to proselytize. But
Thank you, Don.
are we done?
Great.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.